I'm an 18-year-old woman who recently received an amazing birthday gift from my paternal grandparents, an international trip to Isabella and a cheque to cover my expenses. They handed me an envelope with the flight tickets, and I was thrilled. However, the very next day my parents started pressuring me to give the trip to my older sister, Ava. She's 21 and is considered the golden child in our family. My parents argued that Ava, being an architecture major, would benefit more from a trip to Isabella. They said it would help her understand architectural designs better. I tried to explain that I also had plans to major in literature, making the trip equally important for me. Besides, Ava had already turned down a similar offer on her 18th birthday, preferring the money instead. I pointed out that the airline probably wouldn't allow ticket transfers unless it was an emergency. My parents dismissed this, insisting that they just needed the ticket and would handle the rest. This argument dragged on for days, and after 2 weeks I eventually gave in. I didn't want to keep fighting and felt emotionally blackmailed as my parents reminded me of everything they had done for me, framing this as a small favour in return. Their persistence wore me down. At one point, they even suggested that my trip would be a waste, which hurt a lot. They quickly tried to take it back, but the damage was done. They believed Ava's trip would be more meaningful because it would look good on her resume since she's graduating soon. They argued I had plenty of time to travel in the future, unlike Ava, who would start working soon. Reluctantly, I agreed to give up the ticket to avoid more drama. At least I still had the cheque. Sadly, I'm used to this kind of treatment, so I wasn't too surprised. I'm not even sure the airline would allow the ticket transfer based on their guidelines. I didn't think my parents could do much, but they figured out a way to bypass the rules. Yesterday, when I was supposed to leave for the airport, Ava took my boarding pass instead. We got a call from the cops saying Ava had been in an accident and needed to be bailed out. Apparently, she tried to take control of the steering wheel in the cab because she thought the driver was taking the wrong route. They lost control and crashed into a tree. Ava only had a few scratches, but the cab driver was seriously hurt with a broken arm and a deep cut on his forehead. He pressed charges against Ava for causing the accident, so now my parents have to use their life savings to bail her out and settle with the driver to avoid going to trial. When I heard this, I blurted out that it was karma for forcing me to give up my trip. I regretted it immediately, as my parents looked shocked and said I shouldn't joke about something so serious. They told me that once words are said, they can't be taken back, and called me selfish for saying such a thing. This made me even more upset because they had been hypocritical, saying that they didn't want my trip to go to waste. Feeling angry and impulsive, I decided to take action. I packed a small bag and got a cab to follow my parents to the hospital. I realized that no matter what I did, my family would never value or appreciate me, so I might as well live my life the way I want. At the hospital, my parents and I arrived almost at the same time. Ava was talking to the cops, trying to explain the accident wasn't her fault, though it clearly was. I wasn't there to talk to her. I went up to her, asked for the boarding pass, and when she looked confused, I grabbed her purse and found it myself. I made a run for it back to the cab, leaving everyone confused. I headed to the airport and, thankfully, made it just in time. I boarded my flight and was off to Isabella. I didn't check my phone for calls or messages until I landed, and only a couple of hours ago did I find out how angry my family is at me. My parents think I was insensitive because Ava had just been in a terrible accident, even though she caused it herself. They seem to gloss over that fact and focus on how I only cared about my trip. Ava is mad because she thinks I stole this opportunity from her, even though she stole it from me first. If anything, I was just reclaiming what was mine. The general consensus is that I need to apologize, but I'm not sure if I should. Ava also messaged me saying our parents would have to use their savings to settle with the cab driver. I know our financial situation isn't great, so instead of enjoying Isabella, I could have saved the money and given my parents the cheque I got for my birthday. But I chose to be selfish. So, am I the arsehole for taking off to Isabella after my sister's accident? Edit. Hi, I'll answer some of your questions to clarify the situation. First, about the boarding pass. I'm pretty sure my parents or Ava didn't figure out a way to bypass the ticket transfer rules. I think her plan was to get to the airport and wing it. If they had managed something, I wouldn't have been able to board with my passport, as they would have required Ava's. So they didn't have a plan, which worked out for me. Why do I continue to live with my family despite their treatment? This is the kind of treatment I've been used to since I was a child. It's not okay, but my parents' preference for Ava made me feel like I needed to do better to win them over, not that they should treat me better. It was a strange, self-sacrificial way of thinking. I spent 18 years trying to be the best daughter so they'd finally like me, leading to disappointment and frustration. I never wanted to give up, thinking that they'd eventually come around because they were my parents, but that's how a child's mind works. My grandparents live far from the city, away from everything I've ever known. I didn't want to change my lifestyle, even though I often thought I'd be better off living with them. They don't know how my parents treat me, nor does anyone else in the family, because we're good at hiding it. That's why I never considered leaving, but I think I will now. I'm an adult, and I don't need to please anybody anymore. As for my relationship with Ava, we've never been particularly close. I don't hate her, and she doesn't have anything against me. We just don't get along. Regarding my family's financial condition, we're not rich. We're on the lower end of the spectrum since my mum is a stay-at-home mum and my dad is a high school football coach. They often rely on my grandparents for money, and I'm not sure how they plan to handle this situation. If they want more financial help, they'll have to come clean about what they did. That's just how it is with my family. Many of you asked why Ava was in the passenger seat of the cab. Honestly, I don't have a clear answer. It's probably just a habit. She's always chosen that seat during family road trips. It seems like her spot. Ava's a bit of a control freak. She once grabbed the steering wheel from a cab driver because she thought he would drive us into traffic. That ended up causing an accident, so you can see how much she needs to be in control. She even left for the airport almost 5 hours before the flight. I've decided to relax and enjoy my trip. It's unlikely I'll get another chance like this for a few years after I start college. I shouldn't worry about my parents. They're adults and can handle things themselves. It's not my fault they made a bad decision and got hit by karma. It was naive to expect them to appreciate my sacrifice, and I won't let that ruin my fun. I'm having an amazing time in Isabella. I talked to my grandparents this morning and shared everything I've been through at home. It felt good to finally talk about the mistreatment I faced and how my parents favoured my sister. My grandparents were shocked that I hadn't mentioned it before. They were supportive and told me I'd done the right thing. They insisted that when I get back, I should come straight to them. They're arranging for me to move in with them and will cover all my college expenses. I don't have to worry about housing or tuition, which is a huge relief. So, after a single conversation with my grandparents, everything is looking up. My parents had already made it clear they wouldn't pay for my tuition, unlike with Ava. Now, I don't have to deal with that stress. I'm excited to head home in a week, but now I'll be living a much better life. Update. My trip ended a few days ago, and I'm now living with my grandparents. When I returned, my grandparents had the guest room ready and had already moved my things from my parents' house. They welcomed me warmly and told me that they'd confronted my parents after our conversation. My parents had called them the evening of Ava's accident to discuss what to do. They didn't want to use their savings for the settlement or risk going to trial, especially since there was dashcam footage showing Ava caused the accident. The cab driver was demanding a high amount, so my grandparents were needed for help. When my grandparents met with my parents, they first asked about my situation, questioning whether it was true that my parents had mistreated me, and even asked me to give up my trip for Ava. My parents initially tried to avoid the topic, insisting that they were only there to discuss Ava's trouble. But my grandparents insisted on addressing my situation, which eventually led to my parents snapping and admitting the truth. They claimed that my behaviour showed I deserved their treatment, saying I only came to the hospital to grab my flight ticket and that I had always been jealous of Ava. They denied ever treating me unfairly, which was a blatant lie. My parents labelled me as entitled and spoiled and said they wouldn't deal with it when I returned. This was all my grandparents needed to hear to decide to cut ties with my parents. An argument ensued, and my parents told them they were free to leave and that they no longer needed their help. They even said they didn't want me back, making it clear that if my grandparents wanted to take me in, they were welcome to. So my grandparents arranged for everything in my room to be packed up and moved to their house, making sure I could settle in comfortably. After hearing all this, I ended up crying. I'd always known my parents didn't care about me, but they were all I'd known for 18 years. Hearing the truth broke my heart. I hope no one else has to go through something like this. I'm really grateful my grandparents have been there for me. Now, I'm settled with them, and this is my new home. I'll start college in a couple of months, but until then, my grandparents have promised to support me. Even after college, they'll cover all my expenses. I haven't had any contact with my parents or Ava since I returned. I avoided their messages while trying to enjoy my trip. Today, I finally checked them, thinking I was in a better place mentally. I'm glad I didn't check earlier because it would have been another emotional blow. Ava's messages were the same old accusations: selfish, entitled, spoiled. She's glad to be rid of me, claiming I don't deserve her company. I think she's got it twisted. She's the one who doesn't deserve mine. But honestly, it's my parents who hurt me the most. Their messages were no surprise. They called me heartless and said they failed to raise me right. They even blamed me for leaving the hospital to go on my trip. I didn't respond to that. They sent another long message, upset that I complained to my grandparents about how I was treated. They claimed they gave me a comfortable life, and I had no right to complain. They said I was just jealous of Ava and called me a waste of their time and energy. That really hit me hard, and I almost cried. But after talking to my grandparents, I promised myself I wouldn't let their harsh words get to me, so I didn't cry, but I did block them to cut off all access. I'm starting my healing journey and trying to move on. I need to erase all traces of them from my mind if I want to live my best life. I'm not sure if it's possible, but I'm going to try. Update. The funniest and craziest thing happened today. It's been nearly 2 weeks since I got back, and I haven't kept up with what's been going on with my parents and Ava. I assume they're still struggling with the settlement. This afternoon, my parents showed up at my grandparents' house, clearly in a vengeful mood. When my parents arrived, they didn't acknowledge me at all. They walked past me and went straight to the living room to sit with my grandparents. I stood there, unsure of what to do, but my grandparents invited me to join them. They knew my parents wouldn't be happy about this, and I could see it on their faces. But if they were upset, they didn't say anything. Once we were all seated, my grandparents asked why they were there. My parents had previously made it clear they wanted nothing to do with my grandparents because of their support for me. They said they would stick to that, but had some issues to settle first. They presented a document with calculations claiming that they'd spent a huge amount raising me. They expected my grandparents to reimburse them for this amount, as they were now responsible for me. I was stunned by the ridiculous demand for almost $120,000 and had no words for how low this was. It felt like they were trying to make us feel small. My grandparents asked for a moment alone and left to discuss it privately. There was an awkward silence with just me and my parents in the room. They refused to acknowledge me, which was uncomfortable. When my grandparents returned, my grandpa remained calm and polite. He agreed that they would repay the amount my parents claimed, but only if my parents repaid all the money they had borrowed from my grandparents over the years. My parents were taken aback and looked like deer caught in headlights. I had to leave the room to avoid laughing at them. I stayed upstairs until they left. When I came down, my grandparents told me that my parents tried to argue but eventually resorted to cursing us out before leaving. I doubt they'll be back any time soon after this humiliation. Even if they do come back, my grandparents have shown they can handle them. With me heading to college in a couple of months, I'm looking forward to that. Going to Isabella was definitely the best